Okay, so, when you hear about, like, stricter border enforcement, you probably imagine certain things, right?
Hmm.
But there's been something kind of unexpected in the news lately.
Very.
European tourists
Yeah.
from countries we consider close allies,
Mhm.
facing some really long detentions at U.S. borders. Like,
Yeah.
we're talking weeks, even months in some cases.
Wow.
So we're going to really, like, dig into this today and figure out what's going on.
It's really interesting, right? Like it's kind of a new thing.
Yeah,
We're looking at these recent reports,
right.
and they're showing this real tightening of U.S. border enforcement,
Mm-hmm.
but specifically for travelers from Europe.
Oh, wow.
And the thing is, it's not just people with, like, messed up paperwork.
Yeah.
We're seeing people with valid visas
Uh-huh.
or ESTA travel authorization
Right.
being detained
Yeah.
and then ultimately deny entry.
So they're just not letting them in.
Yeah, and it's definitely something we need to understand better.
Absolutely. And it's not like just anecdotal either.
Right.
For this deep dive, we've got reports from sources like the Associated Press and USA Today,
Okay.
and they're detailing these incidents that are actually kind of scary.
Yeah.
And on top of that, the UK, Germany, Denmark, and Finland
Wow.
have all issued revised travel advisories.
Yeah, I mean, that's a big deal.
Yeah.
That's a pretty clear sign that something's up.
Yeah, this is not a small thing.
No, it's not.
So what we really want to do today is figure out why these changes are happening.
Yeah.
Look at what people who've been detained have actually gone through,
Hmm.
and then try to understand what all this means for anyone who's thinking about traveling to the U.S. in the future.
Absolutely, because it could affect a lot of people.
Yeah, for sure. So let's get into it.
Okay.
What's the main difference we're seeing in how the U.S. is handling its border when it comes to European tourists?
Well, it's definitely not what people are used to.
Right.
The big change is that things have gotten a lot stricter.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe even more importantly, way less predictable.
Oh, wow.
Like there's a real chance of being detained.
Yeah.
Or even having your entry completely denied.
Right.
Even if you have all the right documents.
So even if you have a visa or an ESTA,
Exactly.
that's a huge change from what people probably expect when traveling from countries that are allies.
It is.
So what's behind this tougher approach?
Right.
Are there specific policy changes or events that have made this happen?
Well, it seems like it's connected to President Trump's executive orders.
Okay.
The ones that focused on, like, really intense visa screening
Right.
and stronger border security and a stricter approach to immigration overall.
So these broader policies are kind of trickling down and affecting even tourists.
It seems that way, yeah.
Okay, well, it's one thing to talk about policy, but hearing personal stories really makes this real.
Absolutely.
Like the story of Lucas Sielaff,
Right.
the German tourist who was traveling with his U.S. citizen fiancé Lennon Tyler.
Yes, that's a very powerful example.
It really shows the human impact of these changes.
It does.
So they were coming back from a quick trip to Tijuana, Mexico,
Uh-huh.
and Lucas was only 22 days into his 90-day tourist permit.
So he was well within the time limit.
Yeah, he had plenty of time left.
Right.
But when they tried to get back into the U.S.,
Yeah.
things went very wrong.
They did.
And it sounds like it all started with just a simple misunderstanding with a border agent.
It did a misunderstanding about their travel plans.
So what happened there?
Well, the border agent asked Lucas about where he was going and where he lived.
Okay.
And because Lucas' first language isn't English,
Right.
he said, "We're going to Las Vegas."
Uh-huh.
But the agent thought he meant that he already lived in Las Vegas,
Oh, wow.
which would be against the rules of his tourist visa.
Right, because you can't just move there on a tourist visa.
Exactly.
And that misunderstanding just spiraled out of control.
It did.
And he ended up being detained for 16 days.
I know, that's so long.
It's an incredibly long time.
It is.
What was it like for him during that detention?
Well, based on what he said, it was awful.
Yeah.
They did a full-body search on him
Oh, gosh.
and put him in a holding cell where he had to sleep on a bench for 2 nights.
Oh, no.
And then they transferred him to the OT Mesa Detention Center in San Diego.
I mean, that sounds like a nightmare.
It does. And he said he felt angry and sad,
Understandably.
and he had no idea what was going on.
That must have been terrifying.
I'm sure it was very scary.
And it wasn't just Lucas who suffered through this.
Right?
His fiancée, Lennon Tyler, who is an American citizen,
Yes,
she went through a lot, too.
she did.
So what happened to her?
Well, they handcuffed her and chained her to a bench.
Oh, my gosh.
And get this, her dog, who was recovering from surgery, was just left in the car.
No way.
Yes, it's awful.
That's terrible.
They finally let her go after 4 hours,
Wow.
but they didn't tell her anything about Lucas.
Oh, so she didn't know where he was or what was happening?
Nope, nothing.
This just shows how these stricter rules can hurt even American citizens.
It does.
Who are connected to these travelers.
Yeah.
So it's not just affecting the people coming in.
Exactly.
The financial and emotional cost of all this has to be huge.
It is.
We know that Lucas had to buy a really expensive last-minute flight back to Germany.
Right. He had to pay $2,744 for that flight.
Wow, that's a lot of money.
It is. And that's not even considering the emotional damage.
Yeah.
Lucas and Lennon are now thinking about changing their wedding plans.
Which were supposed to be in Las Vegas.
Right. And Lucas might even go to therapy.
To deal with the trauma of being detained.
Yeah, it's serious stuff.
And sadly, Lucas's story isn't unique.
No, it's not.
There's also the case of Jessica Brascia.
Also from Germany.
Who was detained for even longer.
I know. It's unbelievable.
She was also stopped at the Tijuana crossing.
Right.
And they held her for over 6 weeks.
45 days.
More than a month and a half.
It's crazy.
For a tourist.
I know.
And she even spent a week in solitary confinement.
It's hard to believe that this is happening.
Do we know anything about what she went through?
Well, we don't have as many details as we do for Lucas.
Okay.
But we know from a friend that she was incredibly relieved to get home.
Of course.
And she said she's not planning on going back to the U.S. anytime soon.
I can't blame her.
I can't either.
And it's not just Germans who are facing this.
Right.
We're seeing reports about people from other allied countries, too.
Like Becky Burke from Wales.
Right.
And Jasmine Mooney from Canada.
Yeah.
Becky was backpacking and got detained for almost 3 weeks on the U.S.-Canada border.
Wow.
And Jasmine, who's an actress and entrepreneur, and actually had a U.S. work visa.
She had a work visa?
Yeah.
And they still detained her?
Yeah, they held her for 12 days at the Tijuana crossing.
That's crazy.
It is. And it just goes to show that this isn't about one nationality or one type of travel authorization.
So it's not just about tourists.
No.
And it's not just about people without the right paperwork.
Right.
What's really striking is that in a lot of these cases, there's no clear explanation for why they were detained. It's
Right.
not like they were trying to overstay their visas or work illegally.
Right.
They were just trying to visit.
Exactly.
So why are they being detained?
Well, that's the big question, isn't it?
Yeah, and it seems like they're not getting any answers.
No, the reports say that they weren't given clear reasons for being detained,
Really?
even when they offered to leave voluntarily.
They said they'd just go back home.
Yep.
And they still wouldn't let them.
Nope.
That's so strange.
It is. In the cases of Lucas and Jessica Ice, said that they were deemed inadmissible.
Inadmissible to the country?
Yeah, for breaking rules or visa terms.
But they didn't say what rules or what terms?
No, they didn't specify.
That's crazy.
It is. This lack of transparency is really worrying.
Yeah, it creates this feeling of uncertainty and fear for anyone who might want to travel to the U.S.
I agree. And the way they were treated, being handcuffed, chained up,
Mm-hmm.
not given any information,
Right.
it's all very disturbing.
Yeah, it's not how you'd expect tourists from allied nations to be treated.
It's not.
Given all this, it's not surprising that some European countries have changed their travel advisories for the U.S.
No, not at all.
What are they telling their citizens now?
Well, the UK and Germany are basically saying, look, just because you have valid travel documents doesn't mean you're getting in.
Okay.
They're also warning people that they could get arrested and detained even for small mistakes.
Like accidentally overstaying their visa?
Exactly.
Wow.
And Germany's going even further.
Really?
They're telling people to bring proof of their return travel plans.
Oh, wow.
And to be ready to answer a lot of questions from border officials.
That sounds intense.
It is.
And it's not just about the general rules and overstays. There are specific warnings for some groups of travelers too, right?
Yes, there are.
So who's getting these extra warnings?
Well, Denmark and Finland are specifically warning transgender and non-binary travelers.
Okay.
Because the U.S. doesn't recognize non-binary gender markers on passports.
Right.
So they're saying if you have an X on your passport or if your passport gender doesn't match what they think your birth sex is,
Uh-huh.
you might not be let into the U.S.
That's a big deal.
It's a direct result of the current administration's stance on gender identity.
And it's affecting how they handle official documents.
Exactly.
So all of this really shows a shift in how the U.S. is approaching things. It seems like they're less welcoming, at least to some people.
Yeah.
What's the bigger picture here?
Right.
What might be causing this change and how they're enforcing their rules?
Well, Pedro Rios from the American Friends Service Committee has an interesting take on it.
Okay.
He says this kind of treatment of travelers from countries that are usually close allies with the U.S.,
Right.
it's not normal.
Yeah.
And he thinks it's because there's a stronger anti-immigrant feeling in the U.S. right now.
So this broader political climate is impacting how even regular tourists are being treated at the border.
That's what he's suggesting, yeah.
And another thing that's really noticeable is that the U.S. authorities haven't really said anything about this.
Yeah, that's true.
They haven't responded to questions about why there are more detentions
Right.
and why they're not just denying entry instead of holding people for so long.
Yeah, they've been pretty quiet.
And that silence just adds to the worry and makes people wonder what's really going on.
It does.
And the impact goes beyond the people who are detained and their families.
Absolutely.
Like UCLA is even advising its foreign students and staff
Really?
to think carefully about traveling internationally.
Wow.
Because the rules for getting back in could change while they're gone.
That's a big deal.
It is, and it's affecting communities within the U.S., too.
Right.
Like, we're hearing about LGBTQ plus communities feeling trapped.
Yeah.
Transgender and non-binary people are worried that if they travel internationally,
No.
they might be mistreated or not allowed back into the U.S.
Because of the whole gender marker issue.
Right.
It's a very difficult situation for them.
And even leaders in allied countries are speaking up. Like the Premier of British Columbia, David Eby.
I remember that.
He talked about Jasmine Mooney's detention,
Mm-hmm.
and he basically said that the U.S. administration is unpredictable when it comes to border enforcement.
That's right.
So there's this growing sense of unease on an international level about how the U.S. is handling its borders.
Especially when it comes to people from countries that have always been friendly with the U.S.
Right. So what could happen because of all of this in the long run?
Well, that's a good question.
We know Lennon Tyler is planning to sue the U.S. government.
Yeah, she is.
But could there be bigger consequences?
I think so.
Like what?
Well, for one thing, it could affect tourism.
How?
Well, if people start thinking that they might get detained in the U.S., even if they have all the right documents,
Right.
they might just decide to go somewhere else.
That makes sense.
And that could hurt the U.S. economy.
Yeah.
And if these kinds of incidents keep happening, it could also damage relationships with other countries.
Especially countries that have been allies for a long time.
Exactly.
So to sum up this whole deep dive, what's the most important thing for our listeners to take away from all these reports and warnings?
Okay. The main thing is that getting into the U.S., which used to be pretty simple for most European travelers,
Right.
it's gotten a lot more complicated.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a real chance you could be detained even if you have all the right papers.
So even if you think you're doing everything right, you could still end up in trouble.
Yeah, and the way they enforce the rules at the border seems to have gotten stricter and less predictable.
So you never know what's going to happen.
That's right.
It definitely makes you think.
Yeah.
With all these changes and warnings, what does this tell us about whether the U.S. is still seen as a welcoming place? And how could this impact global travel and international relationships in the future?
Yeah, it's definitely something to think about.
And maybe you, like Lucas and Lennon, will want to reconsider your own travel plans because of all this.
It's a possibility.
So as we wrap up, we really encourage you to look into this more on your own.
Yes.
Check out the updated travel advisories from your own country or any countries you're planning to visit.
That's a good idea.
Understanding the rules and knowing what to expect is really important these days.
I agree.
Especially if you're traveling internationally.
Absolutely.
So stay safe out there, everyone.
And stay informed.
And thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
It was great to be here.